get this the beginning.
So as Peter is looking for his notes, for those who missed the Australia presentation, I did record that as well. So I can send you a link about that. Peter very graciously spent a lot of time going over every state in Australia and talked about all the highlights of things you can see. So we're thrilled that he's come back to do New Zealand with us.
Well, thanks, Sheila. Hey, and also thank you very much for putting this on an hour earlier. I do have another Zoom event with Tourism Australia in an hour's time, so I really appreciate not having to double book myself. So for those of you who weren't on the Australia call, I'm Peter Askin. I reside in Chicago. I am a Kiwi, born and bred. And I'm one of the owners of Southern World. So this should be a little bit of an easier shot for me. New Zealand is an awfully lot smaller than Australia, with a lot less people. So Australia has a population of about 25 million and little old New Zealand, about 5. I thought I would very quickly sort of bring you up to date with what's happening down in Australia and New Zealand as far as COVID-19 is concerned. New Zealand declared itself COVID-free about 4 or so weeks ago. That doesn't mean we haven't got any active cases. It just means that there is no spread in New Zealand anymore. It just means that the cases that we have, we are bringing into the country with New Zealanders returning home. So yesterday we had one new case. There are totally 25 active cases in New Zealand, but all of those are sort of hibernating in various hotels around New Zealand for a minimum of 14 days until they test negative a couple of times. So some of you may have seen some of the events that have been going on in New Zealand. We've had several huge rugby matches with up to 45,000 people in the stands. So as you can see, with those sorts of events and no spread, it does equate to being COVID-free. Australia was heading down that route very quickly. And then they had a hiccup in the state of Victoria, more specifically in Melbourne, within one community. So Melbourne, or the state of Victoria, is actually on shutdown again. Queensland opened its borders just last weekend, so people can travel from other parts of Australia into Queensland, so they can do the Great Barrier Reef and Brisbane, etc. And sooner or later, there will be a bubble between Australia and New Zealand, and there will be travel between those two countries. Interestingly, on a phone call with some good contacts of mine in Australia, we were discussing where to next for Australia and New Zealand. And one of the good things for you guys is that we actually foresee Canada as a likely entrant into travel to our part of the world a little bit sooner rather than later. Obviously, I live in Chicago, and we're going pear-shaped down here, but Canada seems to have done a really good job of curbing COVID. So this is not an official notification, but this was just a conversation between friends and industry buddies last week. Actually, Sheila, it was after the SATC show that we did together, okay. where we actually think Australia and New Zealand are likely to rely on the trust we have within the Commonwealth. So that's just a little bit of pie in the sky for us. So you may or may not be aware, Qantas have made an announcement that they are ceasing all international flights into Australia other than New Zealand until June next year.
Oh, wow.
So that was quite a shock to us all, but you know, when you think it through, that's probably a safe bet. It doesn't mean they can't open up earlier than that, but they did make that announcement yesterday. So, but you know, I do think that Canada will be one of the first countries that is let into Australia and New Zealand. So anyway, let me start on my home country, New Zealand. We're about the same size as California. California, Japan, sort of that's about the size of the country. And whilst this heading says New Zealand luxury, it's part of a Tourism New Zealand presentation that does feature luxury properties in New Zealand. Because I want to talk about the destination, I've basically taken out all the properties out to make it more of a destinational presentation, but I can always come back and redo that at some later stage. So why New Zealand? Well, hopefully over the next 40 or 45 minutes or so, I'll explain why. We consider ourselves very diverse, not just in the accommodations that we have, but in our landscapes. We have 12,000-foot mountains, we have white sandy beaches, we have black sandy beaches, we have active and non-active volcanoes, we have bubbling hot mud pools. We just have such a huge diversity of things to see and do down there. It's a microcosm, really, of the world. We think we're a very friendly group of Kiwis, both throughout the land. We're a very diverse country with our Māori culture, but immigrants from all over the world, and we think we're quite an embracing population. A little bit like Canada, we absolutely love the outdoors, and a lot of the vacations that people take to New Zealand, the clients want to embrace that actual background. So we get you out and about to the many places beyond the cities. So this is obviously a pre-COVID slide, but it will get back to normal at some stage, and then you'll see this international route pattern into New Zealand, where we fly direct out of Vancouver and the gateways of San Francisco, LA, and Houston. We were flying out of Chicago, which was close for you guys, and Air New Zealand was looking at flying out of New York come October. Well, obviously that's been put into mothballs, and you can fly in via Hawaii as well. So very well connected with the various airlines in North America. That gives you an idea of the flight times within New Zealand. So it's not a very large place. So to fly from basically the top or near the top of New Zealand, which is Auckland, into Queenstown, is just a 2-hour flight. So pretty easy to get around. Of course, for Canadians, it's a huge self-drive destination. So easy to drive around the country as well. But if you do need air travel, there's lots of connectivity. So that gives you an idea, again, of the sort of the routes and the map. Interestingly enough, with it being 3 islands with Stewart Island on the bottom, it's almost got exactly the same amount of coastline as the United States. So it shows you we have a considerable amount of coastline for such a small country. So I'm going to do a sort of an itinerary that takes us from the very top of New Zealand through the North Island, across the Inter-Island on the Inter-Island ferry, and then down through the South Island. And we'll certainly show you the diversity of the destination. In the Bay of Islands, which is north of Auckland, we have a small settlement called Waitangi. And that is where the treaty between the Queen Victoria and the founders of New Zealand, the Māori, signed the Treaty of Waitangi. The treaty has since been sort of renegotiated in a more fair and equitable way. So it's an interesting place to go and sort of explore the history of New Zealand. It's called the Winterless North. They don't get frosts up there, so it's where a lot of our lemons and such like grow. It's a very temperate climate. And we have a stunning, beautiful tree up there called the Pahutakawa that flowers over the Christmas period, and that's why it's called the New Zealand Christmas tree. The Bay of Islands is home of huge pods of dolphins. There are some amazing marlin fishing up there. Zane Grey still holds some world records in that neck of the woods. And it's an interesting place to explore. When you drive out of Auckland, you can go up one coast and come back down the other coast. It's called the Twin Coast Highway. It's about a 500-mile drive. Part of that drive you can do on 90 Mile Beach, which is heading towards the very top of the North Island, all the way to Cape Reinga. And that's where, at the very top, is the meeting of the Tasman Sea, which is the ocean between Australia and New Zealand, and the Pacific Ocean meets. New Zealand has a ton of stunning golf courses. We have more golf courses per head of population than anywhere else in the world. It's not an expensive sport in New Zealand. It is at properties like this, which is a luxury property called Kauri Cliffs. It's sort of known as the Pebble Beach of New Zealand and has a sister property that I'll show you later called Cape Kidnappers. But there are a lot of golf courses in this neck of the woods. It's also home to the Waipua Forest. And that tree there in front of you, which is absolutely monstrous, is a kauri tree. And so it's a good place to sort of find out a little bit about the Māori culture in the north. It's where the Ngāpuhi tribe is located. So a good place to look at the culture and also some of the stunning nature in that area. So we head back down to Auckland, and this is the city that you would fly into from North America. It's known as the City of Sails, which will bear out in a little while. It's a city of extinct volcanoes. That is Mount Eden that you can see there to the right of the helicopter. Rangitoto there, which is an island just off the coast of Auckland, is another extinct volcano. It sits on two harbours. So one harbour is on the Pacific Ocean, which you can see there, and of course the Tasman Sea on the other harbour. So it's an interesting a city with two different ports on two different oceans. It's a nice temperate climate, doesn't get particularly cold in the winter, and it's a nice warm city in the summertime. Just out from Auckland itself is a stunningly beautiful island called Waiheke. Years ago, it was more of a hippie colony. You'd certainly go out there if you wanted to smoke something different, because there was a lot of marijuana growing out there, and it was quite a beautiful little place where people had their cottages, or what we call a batch in New Zealand. Very inexpensive to own property out there. Now it is a commuter island with some of the most expensive real estate in the South Pacific. It's home to 32 beautiful vineyards. There are some amazing places for dining. for weddings and such. And it's a nice little day trip out from Auckland when you're visiting, or maybe even for a 2 or 3 night stay. So you can see how close it is to Auckland there in the background. Some great activities, zip lining for the kids. That is Stony Ridge, I think, vineyard. But one of the many beautiful vineyards out in on the island. Here's another shot of Rangitoto, and you can see how close that is in. In the foreground, you can see basically the totality of the New Zealand Navy. Not a lot of it. And that's Skytower. So that's a great sky jump. You can jump off the Skytower. You can walk around the ledge. Has an amazing revolving restaurant at the top of it, and great vistas of all of Auckland. There we go. There's the sky jump. So it's almost like a bungee, but you're in a harness. I mentioned we call ourselves the City of Sails. There are literally thousands of yachts on the harbour. It will be hosting the America's Cup early next year. Some of the very few people that are allowed into New Zealand at the moment are sailors that will be racing in the America's Cup, because the borders in both Australia and New Zealand are closed. So the only people that can get in need to have a real good reason to get there, or be New Zealand or Australian citizens. One of the interesting things I talked about, you know, with the diversity of the country, this is a place on the Coromandel, which is about a 2-hour drive south of Auckland on the way to the Bay of Plenty. It's called Hot Water Beach. And at low tide, you can go down onto the beach, grab a shovel and dig a hole into the sand there, and hot bubbling mineral water will come up. So it's kind of very communal. People will, you know, lend you their shovel. They'll use it for a while, and then they'll, you know, move on or go out and swim in the ocean. But it's quite a stunning place to visit. Great for locals and tourists alike. Heading on down from Hot Water Beach, you'd end up in Tauranga and Mount Maunganui. This is a very popular spot for Canadians, especially in the long stay market. A lot of Canadians will come down here in our winter, in the North American winter, and spend 2, 3, 4 weeks or more, and they flock towards the Mount Maunganui area. Very similar to what they do, you know, on the Gold Coast or Sunshine Coast in Australia. As you can see, beautiful white sandy beaches there. So one of the big drives that people will do if they don't go on the route via Hot Water Beach down to Tauranga is that they will take the drive via Waitomo and on into Rotorua. And Waitomo is where you will see these glowworm caves, and you can see the stalagmites there. And there are about 4 different ways that you can see these glowworms. You can go on a pretty simple little boat ride. You can walk through a different area of the caves. There's a private caving area as well. Or you can go blackwater rafting and go down on inner tubes as well, which is quite spectacular. The other journey to get to Rotorua might take you via Hobbiton. And this is a very famous film set. Obviously, it was the film set for both The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, the 2 trilogies. And it is the exact property. So it's one of the very few film sets in the world. So they were allowed to keep it. It's on private land, and that was part of the condition of using this private land. So it is exactly as it was in the movie. And it's quite a stunning place to go and visit. So if you wanted to see both of those sightseeing opportunities, both Waitomo and Hobbiton. Very hard to do them in the same drive on the same day. So you might come back from Rotorua and do one or either of them whilst you're staying maybe 2 or 3 nights in Rotorua. Rotorua is the thermal capital of New Zealand. It has lots of geysers and bubbling mud pools. It's also a place where you will experience Māori culture. Not that you won't see Māori culture all around New Zealand, but there is a definite, it's a definite hotbed of our culture with lots of different opportunities to experience in that region. It's also one of the areas in New Zealand, along with the top of the South Island, Taupo, which is a lake just further south of Rotorua, and the southern streams in and around Queenstown for fly fishing. We have some stunning fly fishing. Some of it is only accessible by helicopter. Some of it's a lot easier to get to. But if any of you are fly fishermen, both New Zealand and Tasmania have some great opportunities for you. All sorts of adventure in Rotorua. They've sort of almost caught up to their distant cousins in Queenstown in the South Island of New Zealand. And they've got a little bit more bizarre stuff. So those balloons there on the bottom, which used to be called zorbing, is now called ogo. And they're filled with water, and then you sit in the middle of them and you roll down the side of a hill. It's a bit of a hoot. Rotorua is home to some of the best mountain biking trails in the world. And we have some amazing zip line through the forests and some excellent whitewater rafting with some very highly rated whitewater rafting through that whole region. It's also home to Rainbow Springs, which is a stunning place to see kiwi conservation in real time. So they have a breeding program there, and it gives you an opportunity to see kiwis up close and personal because they are a nocturnal bird, and generally you would only find them deep in the forest, and you have to know where to find them. Incredibly hard to find. And it's a species, that is struggling for survival. So the breeding conservation program there is well needed. Just a little bit south from Rotorua, as you can see on the map, is Lake Taupo. It's our largest lake, and home to some really nice activities. It's a beautiful, stunning fishing lake, great for kayaking. It's also got this Māori carving into the rock face, not too far from Taupo Township. And it's also home to the Hooker Falls. If you're not going to the South Island and want to experience quite a different experience with jet boating, there's an opportunity for you to do some jet boating in the North Island. Now, just a little bit west of Taupo is the Tongariro National Park, home to the stunning Chateau Tongariro, but that was more to give you a shot of the Alpine Crossing. It's where the Alpine Crossing starts, known as New Zealand's greatest day walk. We'll talk about some of the other multi-day walks that we've got in New Zealand later on, but that's in the central North Island. It's a beautiful walk. You don't have to do the whole 8 hours. There are shorter variations that you can do, but quite spectacular going through that neck of the woods. Now, this is another not so well-traveled area of New Zealand, or I must say that Canadians are probably more likely to see it than your cousins to the south, because you tend to travel for longer stays. But this is a beautiful, unspoilt part of New Zealand called Gisborne. And if any of you watched the award-winning movie from a few years ago called Whale Rider, this is the area that it was filmed in. So if you want a fun movie to watch, go back and see if you can get that on Netflix. I'm sure you can, but yeah, Whale Rider. So plenty of Maori culture in this area. There's some stunning walks. There's some great cycleways in this region, and it's also known, just like its territory to the south, which we'll move on to next, for its wine. So both Gisborne and Napier Hastings area are great wine growing areas. So this is Napier, just to the south, or Hawke's Bay region. And this is, if you can just remember this shot, so at the very end of this set of cliffs is the largest gannet colony in the world. But if you take your eyes all the way down to the right, where you can see some green on the cliffs, that's where you will see Cape Kidnappers, the other stunning golfing property that I was going to talk to you about. And I've got a shot of that coming up shortly. So this area, as I mentioned, famous for its wines. I have this particular vineyard featured because this is my wife's favorite Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. And it also has some great accommodations on property. So if you like a really nice crisp Sauvignon Blanc, Craggy Range has it. It also has some very good sort of light Syrahs, reds. We sort of defer to Australian cousins for really good dark and heavy reds. New Zealand, I think we're better at the Pinots. So Craggy Range actually has a really good Pinot as well. And there we have Cape Kidnappers. And that is the sister property to, what am I thinking of? The property in the Bay of Islands. So when a number of years ago, the owner of these properties put together a thing called the Kiwi Challenge, and he brought down the top 4 under 30-year-old golfers in the world, and they played for $1 million. They played one day at Pebble Beach at Kauri Cliffs, and one day here at Cape Kidnappers. And Johnny Miller, who was doing the TV commentary for this 2-day event, he'd already said that the other course was Kauri Cliffs was the Pebble Beach of New Zealand. And when they flew in here by helicopter and they were hovering above this course, he said, "Good grief, if Kauri Cliffs is Pebble Beach, this is Pebble Beach on steroids." It is an amazing golf course. I've played it once and I've run around it once. So if you've got any friends or family that are golfers, this would be the one to play in New Zealand. The other thing we like to do in New Zealand, other than drinking beer, is drinking wine. So I thought I should give you a shot of the wine areas of New Zealand. And there you can see Gisborne and Hawke's Bay that I just talked about. And the various other regions. When we drive from Hawke's Bay down to Wellington, it's called the Wine Trail. And you stop in on the way and go to Martinborough and the Wairarapa on the way to Wellington. So obviously the main area is definitely this area. That's where the majority, Marlborough, of the Sauvignon Blancs come from, but there are other excellent wine growing areas. This is our capital, the coolest little capital in the world. It's not a very large city. It's not only the capital, but it's the political capital as well. It has the Beehive, Parliament buildings are there. So a nice little city, very, very compact. It has a great restaurant, coffee, cafe culture. It also has some great things to see and do whilst you're in Wellington. One of the places that you must see is the Weta workshop. And Weta became famous because it did all the artwork, all the building of the costumes, all the cinematography, for everything for Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. But it's now a mecca for film production. James Cameron is currently, who actually is lives in New Zealand for half the time, is filming the latest Avatar there. Prime is currently filming a TV series of Lord of the Rings. Now, I think if you remember back, and I was telling you about the America's Cup sailors being allowed into New Zealand, the other people that have been allowed in are the production people and any needed actors and associates for the movie making industry, because it's a billion-dollar industry for us, and so they have been deemed essential. So they have all been let into New Zealand, do their 14-day quarantine, test negative, and then they get on with their work. The other thing Wellington is famous for is Te Papa, our national museum. If any of you had visited Washington, DC and been into the museum, it's a very similar concept. Te Papa is a very interactive museum. It's got some stunning things to see. It has the best collection of Māori artifacts, obviously anywhere in the world, and that's worth seeing. There it is, right across the road from our Parliament buildings. But it also has a great scale version of Gallipoli. And these are lifelike, unbelievably lifelike. So all of these people, whatever they are, have actually been made in the Weta studios. So it's very, very moving. And if you are visiting Wellington, it is definitely should be high on the list of things that you should do. Now, normally I would show a shot of Wharekoho Lodge, but I took all those shots out. But I thought I'd show you this shot anyway, because that's a common sight in New Zealand when you're driving around, is sheep being herded or mustered along our roads. The Wharekoho property is right next to James Cameron's, the director, next to his farm. So gave me an opportunity to talk about that as well. So I thought I would give you this sort of slide. This is an idea of sort of how our temperature range goes in Fahrenheit, obviously. So New Zealand never gets too hot and never gets really too cold. So it is a year-round destination, especially for those of us that live in the climates that we live. When you go to New Zealand in our winter, it's not particularly cold compared to the northern North American winter. So to get between the two islands, you can fly, you could swim if you want to. People do it, long distance swimmers, of course. But the main way is to take one of the inter-island ferries between Wellington and Picton. It's about a 3-hour sail. It gets a little bit rough in the middle in the Cook Strait, but most of the journey is in the confines of the Milford Sounds, and it's quite a spectacular journey. You can take your motorhome or your rental car on board, but most of the time people will leave it in either end in Wellington or Picton and pick up a new one on the other side. So there's the good map of the South Island, and we're going to do a little drive from Picton at the top over to Nelson, and we're going to catch the train down via Kaikoura to Christchurch. We're going to catch a train from Christchurch across to the west coast, and then drive down into Fiordland and then back via Dunedin, Mount Cook, back to Christchurch. So that's a nice little journey that we'll be embarking on. South Island, unbelievably dramatic scenery. If I go back to the slide and show you, if you go from just about the M of Marlborough all the way down to sort of the almost the D of Fiordland in the bottom right-hand, left-hand corner, you have the Southern Alps of New Zealand, which you can see in the photo to the right there. There is more skiable terrain on those Alps than the Swiss and Austrian Alps combined. So just a dramatic mountain range in between the Pacific Ocean and the Tasman Sea. Less populated, you know, Christchurch is about 300,000. That's the biggest city in the South Island, whereas Auckland is well over 1 million. Beautiful rivers. The Canterbury Plains look like you're in Kansas. Oops, sorry. What happened there? Need to get out of that. Sorry about that. Go back. So that was that slide anyway. Talking about cycling, something that if you're keen on doing, and I talked about it, the cycle trails of up near Gisborne. When our last Prime Minister was in power, he was also the Minister of Tourism. And during his tenure, he decided that we should expand on the cycle trails in New Zealand. And now we have about 1,600 or 1,700 miles of cycle trails around the country. So there are over 22 great rides. Some of them are in trails like this. Some of them are, as I say, retired railway lines. Some of them are on roadways, some of them through vineyards. So there's great opportunities around New Zealand to do cycle. Starting in the top of the South Island, if we're doing Picton, Marlborough, that's obviously where, as I said, Sauvignon Blanc is. You can go swimming with dolphins in the Milford Sounds. If we cross over to the Nelson region, that's where the Abel Tasman National Park is. Great hiking and kayaking in that area. There's a great 3- and 4-day walk up the Abel Tasman National Park. And then coming back down on our way to Christchurch, we can take a nice train journey that stops off in Kaikoura along the way. Gives you the opportunity there to swim with the dolphins, great seafood in that area, great whale watching, go kayaking out amongst the dolphins as well. And there you can see the whale watching with the Southern Alps or the foothills of the Southern Alps in the background. If we head on further down to Christchurch, which is my sort of home city, you're close enough to the Alps there, but you're also close enough to the Pacific Ocean and a nice little French settlement called Akaroa, where you can again swim with the Hector dolphins. It's also where the International Antarctic Centre is as well, and where you pick up the Transalpine train to head across to the west coast. And that's the Transalpine that goes from the Pacific Ocean over to the Tasman Sea from Christchurch to the west coast. Now on the west coast, completely different scenery again in topography, because you've got 12,000 foot mountains, glaciers coming down into a rainforest and an ocean. It's the only place in the world where you would ever see that. So they aren't, huge glaciers like the Athabasca, but they are large enough. You can walk up them, and you can also take a helicopter up to the top as well. What we were starting off as an experiment, which unfortunately we won't be able to do probably for about the next year or two, is we were starting to overnight on the glacier. They had built a sort of a semi-permanent tented spot up there. So that was a very cool experience for the very few people that got to experience it earlier this season. Now, whilst you think mainly of walking in New Zealand in the Milford Sound area, there are great alpine walks and coastal walks all around New Zealand. As we head on down through the west coast, we head into part of the Lake District where we have Wanaka, the Central Otago region, and Queenstown. Wanaka is the first lake that we come to, and it's sort of like Queenstown was maybe 50 years ago. It has a couple of ski fields in that region, but it's a little bit more sleepy and not quite as busy as Queenstown. Queenstown, of course, is known for its activity and has plenty to see and do. It has a ton of things that any sport that you could or activity that could kill you, you'd probably find in and around Queenstown. Beautiful city. It's kind of our Aspen as a ski resort, but unlike Aspen, I should say, it's a 24/7, 365 destination. It's got plenty going on throughout the year. We call it the adventure capital of the world, with some amazing activities for your clients to do. Different ways to bungee jump. This particular bungee jump over the Kawerau River, you can ask to have your head dunked in the water, or come up wet free. Some of the best skydiving opportunities in the world. That's my son who works for me. That was his skydiving on his 25th birthday. He could virtually see both the Pacific Ocean and the Tasman Sea on this jump. Just absolutely spectacular. A lot of the Lord of the Rings was found in this region, as well as the Hobbit. So it gives you an opportunity to take maybe one of the jet boating trips up the Dart River with nomad safaris. Another opportunity for some stunning golfing in Queenstown. There's several good top-rated golf courses. You can even do heli golf. There's a few places, even in the winter on the glaciers. They'll take you up and put down a tee box for you, and you hit biodegradable golf balls off the glaciers. More wine, lots of wine area in this area. Some of the best Pinots throughout the Central Otago region. And one of my favorite shots, this was a group tour that we did a number of years ago for a North American group, where we put them all on this glacier together. There was 5 to a helicopter, so it was just a spectacular day. This region is known for its fjords as well. So 2 of the fjords, or we call them sounds down there, are both Milford and Doubtful. Both of them have overnight cruising as well as day cruising on these particular sailed vessels. And then you have a more luxury vessel like this that is Milford, and does actually go down to Doubtful as well if needed. So we come back across in through the Catlins into Dunedin. This is very much our Scottish heritage city. The University of Otago is there. It's also the home to one of the largest albatross colonies in the world. Penguins, sea lions. There's a beautiful vintage railway in that area as well. So as you can see on the map, it's on the Pacific Ocean side of New Zealand. Just a little bit north of there is a beautiful little town called Oamaru, which has a wonderful little blue penguin colony that comes ashore every night. So if you're not going to Melbourne and still want to see penguins, that's a great place to see them. And then coming back into the centre, back into the alpine land of Mount Cook, that's our highest mountain at just over 12,000 feet. Some great day walks there, and you can also go and land on a glacier from Mount Cook as well. And then before you head back to Christchurch, this is one of my favourite spots in all of New Zealand. I grew up about an hour and a half's drive from here in a little town called Geraldine, but this is Lake Tekapo. My sister actually lives there now as well. This dark sky experience is on Mount John, which is a small sort of mountain hill just on the shores of Lake Tekapo, and you can see Lake Tekapo just in between those two buildings. It used to be a spy tracking station that the US government had a long-term lease on it. And so they would very secretly track satellites up here. When the lease expired, they left all the buildings as is, and all their equipment they donated to the University of Canterbury, Christchurch, and the University of Texas. And then we invited a university from Japan, and now there is all these satellite tracking and international renowned telescopes up there. What they did with the little township of Lake Tekapo is they capped all of the street lights, so there is no unnatural light. So you go up there at night and you just can't believe the constellations. The Southern Cross is just about falling on you. So that's a great experience as a night sky experience in the Southern Hemisphere. And then the next slide sort of encapsulates all of the South Island of New Zealand. That is Lake Tekapo, right behind the cyclists there. So you can see how the snow-fed lakes are just an absolutely beautiful blue color. So folks, that is New Zealand, as us Kiwis kind of refer to it. And I'll turn my video back on so you can see me again and make this a little bigger.
Peter. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm very proud of my country. Just like Canadians are very proud of your country. It's a beautiful country to show off.
I'll just start to unmute people if anybody has any questions. I know Peter has to run at 5, so we won't have a lot of time for chit chat, but if anybody has any questions, we got the expert here.
I have some pictures for you if you want to put it on speaker view.
Sure. Pictures you've taken when you went, Laura?
Yeah. First of all, I got the New Zealand, there's the flag and then the feather.
There you go.
The Kiwis. Is it possible to put it on speaker view? No?
I got a multiple screen. Do you want me to show you or?
Yeah, usually when you put it on speaker view, I show up, but you've got it on share screen.
Yeah,
oh,
take it off share screen.
Yeah, okay, I got you.
I'll go stop share. There you go.
Okay. Is that good?
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Okay. So if you put it on speaker view, you can see the Kiwis.
There we go.
The New Zealand shirt. And then there's you were talking about the Kiwis that you could see there.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the Maori experience that you could see also in Rotorua.
Yep. Very good.
How come it's not clicking now? Okay, now my computer doesn't want to work.
That's awesome though. When were you last in New Zealand, Laura?
3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
I spent about 3 months going around the different islands, Australia and New Zealand, but many of the islands.
Okay,
Wonderful.
cool. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone have any questions they have for Peter?
Well, I don't know if it's for Peter, Sheila, but as you know, B and I have a trip planned to New Zealand in early February. And of course, we're wondering whether it will happen.
Well, we're not flying you by Qantas.
Canada, we have it booked already.
Yeah. No, I meant where Peter said Qantas isn't bringing anyone in until June. Peter, there's no way to know when you're going to open.
No, there isn't. But I tell you what I would do is, honestly, you want to hope that you go, but you also want to have a think about, if I can't go then when, and have a backup plan, because truth be told, nobody knows at this stage. Nobody's making announcements other than Qantas. But if I was a betting man, and not a good idea to bet during a pandemic, I would say it's more than likely going to be, June, July, August before New Zealand opens its borders.
You mean next year, 21?
Next year,
Oh,
yes.
Wow. Now, Peter, I know working with Southern World, for example, we can set up itineraries with you, and you're not even taking deposits, right? Like we could.
Correct.
And then we can move it ahead to the next year.
Yeah, very, very, very simple to do that.
Yeah. So that's always a possibility. Kathleen
I
and
hate
me
to be
have
the
a
bearer
world
of bad
cruise.
news.
Pardon me?
I hate to be the bearer of bad
I
news.
know,
Believe me, I don't want to be saying these things, and I have enough staff that are worried about it as it is. So
It's reality, unfortunately, though.
yeah.
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 We had Canada-US border is going to stay closed for another month today.
Needs to be longer than that, but
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
So any questions about New Zealand while we have the expert? He's going to have to run.
I do
No?
have a few more pictures.
Oh,
That's the Maori, the boat. If you let me speak, then the pictures show up in the big in the speaker view. The fern is their thing. They like to make faces, those guys. The women and the men get their faces tattooed. Ferns are their thing. They get tattoos on the back, the front. That's the big Skytower, daytime, nighttime. And you can go to a place in Auckland, and you can go into, I think it's Kelly's, and it's you can go in with the penguins.
Kelly Charlton's, yes.
Yeah.
So
Little easier
I will show you my. There is my Māori tattoo.
Oh, we can't quite
Let's
see
Here,
it.
hold it up a little bit higher.
Oh, there you go. Look at that. Awesome. Should we ask what it means?
Yeah. So you should recognize what the koru is.
Yes.
So the koru is on the back of the Air New Zealand aircraft. That's the fern.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And these are the sails of my waka, which is a Maori canoe. So when they sailed from Hawaii, they sailed on their wakas. So that's the sails of my waka. And these little jagged pieces in the sails represent the peaks of the Southern Alps of New Zealand.
Wow.
Because the Southern Alps of New Zealand is, the region is Aorangi or Aoraki, and the ship that brought my family from Ireland to New Zealand, or my waka, was the MV Aorangi. So all my children have the name Aorangi as a middle name.
Oh, wow.
So I had that moku, the tattoo, done on the floor of the symposium, museum in Washington, DC.
Oh,
at a Maori exhibition while people watched one of the Maoris from New Zealand do the tattoo.
Oh, how cool is that?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So you can actually get this done at Te Puia now. So yeah. So anyway, that's just another side story. I better fly.
Peter, a quick question for you before you run. I know that New Zealand relies on tourism. It's a big chunk of your domestic product. What do you think the impact is going to be? Obviously, it's going to be huge, right?
It is our biggest revenue earner in the whole country. It's the biggest employer and the biggest revenue earner. What we are hoping is that the bubble between Australia and New Zealand will help.
Yeah.
New Zealanders will travel domestically, and they already are. But the biggest amount of international tourists that we get come from Australia. So the sooner the bubble opens, the better it will be for all of us.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and coming back. And this has just been awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.